Hi there, Will here, and today I'd like to talk to you about a camera that I've owned for almost 6 years now, the Nikon F3. I'll start this review off the same way that I have my other long-term reviews, which is to say that I've owned the camera for 5 years, and in those 5 years it has received 0 repairs. It hasn't needed any repairs. In fact, at the moment, all it really needs maybe is a CLA because the lens release button is slightly sticky and doesn't pop out all the way unless you jimmy it a bit, but really no true issues, which is why if you've been around on this channel for a while, you'll have heard me describe it as pretty much perfect, which in my eyes it is. That's not to say that it is completely without failure though. One of the biggest downsides of the F3 is that it has a proprietary hot shoe mount, which means that if you want to put a flash on it, you need to either get something like an SB16A, which has a very specific little mount mechanism for you to be able to slot the flash on, or you need to get a hot shoe adapter. There are actually some modern ones that I think have pretty good capabilities on them that you can buy now, but it is a bit of a downside, and I struggled immensely trying to use this thing because I picked it up instead of the adapter because I wanted to be a purist, and I wouldn't recommend doing that. If you want to use flash on the F3, then pick up a hot shoe adapter. A decently large downside would be the fact that the LCDs can fade in these. Mine hasn't, and it didn't on my F3 HP either, but it is a downside that some people have spoken about. And the LCD is quite essential in the metering process because it gives you your shutter reading. And on the note of the LCD, there's a little red button on the viewfinder which intended purpose is to light up the LCD if you're in the dark so that you can see what it's saying, but I think that worked for all of 2 months on mine before it stopped working, and on the F3 HP, which I had alongside this, it never worked at all. So that is definitely quite prone to failure, not that it's essential. I don't think it would be fair for me, Will, as the more critical person on the camera front, to talk to you about the positive sides of this camera, so I'm going to have my friend Hypebeast Will come over again and tell you all about all the wonderful things that this F3 can do. The Nikon F3 is one of the greatest 35mm SLR cameras ever made. From its design, which was done by some Italian fella called Giorgetto, who designed a bunch of cars and guns and things like that, to its functionality, which is pretty much flawless, it's revered and held up for a long time now. It's also pretty robust. I set my F3 HP on a rock one day and it fell off of that rock and it took a picture while it was falling off for some reason. It actuated the shutter, but it didn't have any impact on the camera's functionality and didn't leave a mark, so far as I could tell. And this one has lasted for 5 years and given me absolutely no issues. In terms of noteworthy features, it's got mirror lockup, a self-timer, PC sync, double exposure, timer mode, autos, an aperture priority setting so that you can just blast away if you want to. Pretty much anything you could want out of a camera in terms of ease of use and functionality is here, and this was designed in 1980. It's functional enough for you to be able to use it in pretty much any scenario, but also looks quite retro, so it's kind of perfect, I guess. And manual focus, which is the main issue I have with my other main 35mm camera, which is the Contax G2. This one, you're relying on your focus. It's also pretty modular. You can remove the viewfinder and replace the ground glass. I think my favorite ground glass is the one, the whole thing sort of becomes a split prism, and the bits that aren't in focus are like jagged little prisms, and the thing that is becomes sharp and super contrasty. So you can also make it an F3 HP by changing out the high point finder for the stock one if you wear glasses. You can also add a advance mechanism to the bottom. It's got all these little bits and bobs. You just plonk it on there, and then I think you get a decent amount of frames per second for a camera from 1980. And if you want to tone things back, you can shoot it without batteries. Not particularly effectively. I think you get an 80th of a second shutter speed with this little manual switch. But you can use it in time mode, with the manual switch with no batteries. So you could do long exposures if you want to, and to do that, you switch it to T mode, actuate it, it's taking an exposure now, and then to stop the exposure, you switch the dial back. Simple. But wait, I'm not done. You can also put pretty much any f-mount lens on it. And there are a lot of f-mount lenses out there at this point. I think some of the older ones are a bit tricky because the flange on the older wide angles extends into where the mirror would sit. But because it has mirror lockup, you lock the mirror up and you go ahead. There are a few cameras that have the functionality of this thing that you can walk around with and people will go, wow, that's a cool old camera. And it's not just a cool old camera, it's the cool old camera that informed the aesthetics of pretty much every camera that followed it. This nifty red stripe, ever seen it before? Well, it started here with the Nikon F3. Thanks for that, hypebeast Will. I guess I can say overall now that the Nikon F3 is a very robust, long-lasting, since it's the longest-lasting 35mm camera that I own, repairable, and very special to me, considering it was the first proper 35mm camera that I bought. Camera. They're also still quite reasonably priced, to be honest. I mean, for what you can get out of the thing, it's very low down, especially considering how repairable and hardy they are, in my opinion. And I reckon, out of any of the cameras I've spoken about on this channel, this one is probably the most worth buying. I had the Pentax K1000 for like 6 months before I got this, and a Yashica 635 also for like 6 months, but then I decided I was going to start taking things seriously, and I looked into it a bunch and asked around, and this is the camera that people told me to buy. So I got this one and an F3 HP for about $150, I think, in 2016. I've since sold the F3 HP when I got my Contax G2, but this one has lasted and will continue to be with me for the foreseeable future. I have no desire to get rid of it. And you can even, if you're a bit of a psychopath, get a waist level finder for this camera, which would probably be quite a large struggle to use in terms of focus, but would look very cool and might be good for like candid stuff, I suppose, because then you get to look down at it. No one's expecting you to look down into a camera like this to make a picture, so it's nice to have that option.